Around a year ago, I reviewed the HIGVR Gloves. Gloves somehow cheaper than a lot of full controllers and about half the price of any other gloves on the market. To put it bluntly, they sucked. The software was atrocious and they didn't work correctly with VRChat, which is like the use case for VR gloves? Yeah, I didn't have much good to say about them. Well, HIGVR finally put out an update that makes them sorta usable. Are they still a waste of money though? Or are these an actual viable option for gloves? For a quick refresher, let's take a look at the gloves and what they're able to do. Everything on mine are 3D printed, but they don't sell them like this anymore. At least some parts are injection molded, but it's unclear what actually is. Finger tracking wise, the HIGVR gloves are truly worse than any other glove you can buy. Durability wise, they're in theory better than most other ones. Instead of flex sensors like most other gloves use, the HIG gloves use a Hall effect sensor paired with a magnet. This means there's no physical sensor that can wear down over time. They don't do full finger movement though. You can only curl your fingers as in open and close them and not splay them as in move them side to side. Think of these things like a Valve Index controller or one of those Quest finger tracking add-ons, but just as a glove. They are a tiny bit more accurate though, since it's a lot easier to move each finger independently. You also get control over your thumb past just relying on capacitive sensors and buttons or a joystick. For the price, I don't think the tracking capabilities are necessarily a problem. EOZ's immersive gloves are the only thing in a comparable range, and they're $300. Except, they aren't actually $300 if you don't already have Tundra trackers, because you are forced to use Tundra trackers with them. A year ago, part of what made HIG's gloves really unique was what you could use to track them. Obviously, you can use a Vive or Tundra tracker, but you can also use your headset's controllers. This isn't as unique now since a lot of other companies have started offering that. HIG does claim to support more controllers than anyone else, but oddly enough, they don't seem to sell mounts for all of them. I'm assuming you can contact their support and ask for them because, like, how is something supported if there isn't a mount for it? But it's just really weird to not list them. Additionally, they don't offer CAD files for their mounts. If you end up needing a new one, you have to buy theirs. And if you have an unsupported device, you have to model everything from scratch. What a great time that is. Really weird to do this considering all of their competitors offer those files to make DIY a lot easier. Also, just because you can use your controllers to track the gloves doesn't mean that the gloves work for standalone games. You still have to be on PC VR. Do keep in mind that using your controller as a tracker is gonna really throw off the balance of the glove. And finally, the last hardware thing is the controller module, which is included for the $250. It has a joystick and your A/B buttons. You also get access to a system button right below where your trackers mount. Trigger and grip are both handled with gestures. The module gets the job done, but I wouldn't call it amazing. Everything on it's really small, and I find it really difficult to get it to sit in a place where I find it comfortable. It's more than fine for just using while chilling in VRChat with some friends, but if you want to move over to a game world or just play regular VR games, things can start to feel really awkward. The gestures work consistently, although it can be really difficult to select stuff precisely with them. Trigger has you pull your index finger in like you're pulling the trigger on a gun. When you do that though, the back of the glove where your tracker's mounted can shift around, which moves your pointer around. Trying to use something like a desktop overlay can end up being infuriating. There's also no feedback besides what's happening on your screen, or if you're lucky, a noise that plays when you select something. They really should have included a haptic motor in the controller module. It's not like they're that expensive. Grip is closing your middle, ring, and pinky fingers. This one is fine, maybe a bit too fine though, since it sometimes activates really easily. I find myself accidentally grabbing my VRChat menu when trying to click around or scroll through it, which can get pretty annoying sometimes. Before we move on, please consider subscribing to my channel if you aren't already. It really helps me out a lot, and a lot of my viewers aren't subscribed. Realistically, the hardware isn't amazing, but that didn't seem like a problem in the past because HIG as a company is extremely sloppy, and the software for the gloves was just terrible. HIGVR is definitely less sloppy than before, but still not great. You can finally download the software off their website instead of needing to be in their Discord for it. That's amazing! Except when I first went to download the newest version, the link was broken. Thankfully, they did fix that. The product listing is also really bad now. 2 different variations of the controller module appear in images. Notably, the different looking one has a file name that implies some sort of AI generation was involved. You can't zoom in on images, but don't worry, some of them are already so zoomed in that the clarity is terrible. By far the worst part is that they're selling business variations of their glove on the same page as the consumer version. There's no documentation on these other variants at all. No pictures of them, no descriptions of them to justify why they're hundreds of dollars more, and nothing saying if you as a regular consumer can buy them and be able to use them. Regardless, enterprise hardware just shouldn't be sharing a listing with consumer hardware. Yeah, very odd company, but welcome to VR, I guess, because a lot of companies are just like that. The bigger issue was the software, which they took over a year to fix some really major problems with it. I'll give them some credit for putting fixes out to critical issues, like their software crashing Steam VR when the Steam version of Space Calibrator was open. That is the barest of bare minimum, though, and there's still a lot of other stuff they didn't fix, so let's start with that. The mount calibration page is awful. The boxes are not labeled with which ones are rotation offsets and which ones are position, nor is there anything indicating which ones are the X, Y, and Z axes. Additionally, the Lighthouse mode box is still here and still seemingly doing nothing. If you're using trackers for the gloves and not controllers, it still isn't able to remember which trackers you previously assigned to them. This is really annoying since you have to keep track of serial numbers and remember to select the right ones every time you start a VR session. And then when you're in Steam VR, you get the emulated index controllers that show up, but the tracking method you have on top of the gloves shows up alongside them. If you're using normal trackers, this means that when you go to calibrate your full body tracking in VRChat, it can assign your tracking method as your elbow trackers and nothing will look right. I really don't understand why none of that has been changed in the past year. They don't make the hardware unusable, but they're quite simple user experience problems that just make it more annoying to use. Considering putting on a glove is already more annoying than picking up a controller, that is not a good thing. The things that did make the hardware borderline unusable have been fixed. There are finally offsets available for all of the mounts in the software. Previously, for a lot of them, you had to go into HIG's Discord server and manually copy values out of screenshots. Finger tracking calibration works a lot better now. No longer am I getting multiple fingers on both hands that refuse to close all the way, or are for some reason closed when my hand is completely open. Now there's more like one total, and for the most part it works correctly for most of the range of motion, only really having problems near the very edge of closing completely. By far the biggest issue was the VRChat issue. Previously, the way these gloves worked caused VRChat's finger tracking input to be active. This made it really easy to accidentally move around, jump, or turn. These locomotion settings could be turned off, but the real problem came when you tried to select things in menus with the trigger. HIG's gesture worked fine in pretty much every game. In VRChat though, that gesture usually got overridden. What it expected you to do was touch your virtual index finger and thumb together, which you can't really do easily on gloves without splay. There's no way to disable this gesture. To select stuff, you had to find a way to use it, which for me usually meant half bending in my index finger and then putting my thumb down. This worked, but unfortunately it worked twice. What would end up happening is your thumb would phase through your index finger, so it would trigger once when it went down, and once when it came back up. This made interacting with pretty much anything infuriating. Trying to type on a keyboard? Well, hope you wanted each letter twice. Trying to activate a mirror or any other toggle in a world like that? Hope you only needed it for about a second before it disables itself again. Genuinely, such a huge issue, and I don't understand how a glove that was supposedly made for VRChat could release with that. Now, they just don't activate the finger tracking input, which is the way things should have been in the first place. Congratulations, HIG! Your gloves now work for like the one thing anyone buys VR gloves for. I would say these gloves are finally in a state where I'd call them usable. It's difficult to say if you should buy them or not though. This is the absolute cheapest way to experience VR gloves. However, you aren't really gaining much tracking fidelity over just using index controllers or one of those Quest finger tracking add-ons. You're still gonna want a nice set of controllers around anyways, since unless the only thing you do is mirror dwell in VRChat, these things aren't completely replacing them. Then there's the fact that HIG takes forever to fix major software issues. Taking a year to fix something that greatly impacts usability is insane and quite frankly unacceptable. It's not like they're very quick about putting out fixes for their crashes either. Don't get me wrong, they're fun to play around with now that they work mostly correctly, and hopefully they stay working correctly, but they just have enough software jank to get making them ready to use more annoying than it should be. Then once you are actually using them, you'll probably find that you want a controller for most things anyways. I'd like to take a second to thank my channel members with an extra big thanks to Rikachu EX and Sync for the win. If you want to support the channel past just subscribing, becoming a member is a great way. All members get to see videos a little bit earlier, and tier 2 and above get some special videos.